MAHORAGA vs Nomu, two absolute punching powerhouses the size of milk trucks, both with regeneration that would make Wolverine blush. Which one wins? The 8-handled sword Divergent Sila Divine General MAHORAGA, or this random Nomu that was so busted it didn't even have a name? The divine curse technique of the Zen'in clan, or the twisted creation forced into reality from the minds of All For One and Dr. Kyudai? Just so that we can compare these two characters more effectively, I'll go through both of these fellas' major stats and then compare them to decide who wins. So we'll first take a look at these characters' AP, then their speed, their durability, and then take a look at any hacks that they may have. It goes without saying, given the thumbnail, but I'll say it anyway, the specific Nomu that we will be discussing here will be the Nomu from the attack on USJ, and for MAHORAGA, we'll mainly be focusing on the Shinjuku variant used by Sukuna, but we will of course be referring to the Shibuya variant when necessary to help determine some of its stats. Given how our main man MAHORAGA is first in the title, why don't we take a look at him first and then get some stats up, just so we can see how impressive this absolute unit is. So, MAHORAGA's AP. MAHORAGA, just like a lot of Jujutsu Kaisen characters for the most part, is a punch and kick merchant overall, outside of like 1 or 2 slashes towards the end of his life, and as a result it can make it difficult to determine his raw level of attack potency. We just have to get a kind of ballpark level of power that is consistent with the other top tiers of the Jujutsu Kaisen world. One way to do so is to correlate Gojo's level of strength with MAHORAGA's, and then just say MAHORAGA is somewhere around but below this level of power. But if we're going to do that, it's also kind of difficult, as for a lot of Gojo's attacks he's using blue, and due to MAHORAGA's ability of adaptation, his damage can't be consistently judged, as they will be slowly doing less and less damage, and as a result it's easier to look at what Gojo's capable of doing with raw cursed energy. So for Gojo's strength, we can look at him being freed from the prison realm. When he was freed, he created an earthquake, one that was felt all the way in Saitama when he himself had teleported from the bottom of the Japan Trench, which was where the back end of the prison realm was. This earthquake that he created with raw cursed energy has been calculated to have been around 4.5 to 5 on the Richter scale. The AP needed for a feat like this would be large town to small city levels of attack potency, if not higher. Now, this feat was accomplished using raw cursed energy, not from actually attacking, so it's fair to say that his level of attack potency is above, but around this level somewhat. So above small city levels of attack potency for Gojo, and MAHORAGA is obviously below Gojo's level of attack potency because, you know, he did nuke his ass. However, they are relative as they do land attacks on each other, so small city levels of AP is relatively consistent with what we see Gojo and Sukuna do during Shinjuku. They're cutting through and throwing large buildings at each other, so it makes sense that their levels of attack potency is around small city level, if not a bit higher. But overall, Gojo's AP is around small city level, and thus will place MAHORAGA around that level. This is also pretty consistent with what we see MAHORAGA do, being capable of deflecting attacks like 15-finger Sukuna slashes, which have been again seen going through multiple buildings, and we literally see MAHORAGA punch Sukuna so far that he leaves the curtain created at the beginning of the Shibuya incident, meaning he is more than likely relative to this level of power. Yes, you could argue that he may be stronger than this, but there aren't many strong pieces of evidence to suggest MAHORAGA himself has a higher level of AP outside of his own slashes, which would be relative to Sukuna slashes, which yet again we see cut through buildings and stuff like that. Yes, but he manages to cut through the limitless. Yes, but that's less of an AP feat and more of a testament to his adaptation. So overall, in regards to his AP, looking at a casual feat of Gojo creating an earthquake is a good way to find a baseline of power to compare MAHORAGA to. And we'll be doing the same thing in looking at a casual feat for All Might when taking a look at the Nomu's AP and comparing them thusly. But before that, how fast is MAHORAGA? Despite Big Raga's nickname insinuating that he's more of a behemoth, he still manages to consistently tag Gojo in Shinjuku, as well as keep up with 15-finger Sukuna when weaker in Shibuya. And as a result, we can look at speed feats that Sukuna has and kind of put MAHORAGA in that ballpark of power. Now, Jujutsu Kaisen in regards to versus battles tends to be a little slower than other series, and that's because the speeds of characters revolve around 2 specific things: Naoya's speed feat of reaching Mark 3 and piercing blood. Since Naoya's speed feat isn't really relevant or necessary to mention in this specific case study, we'll focus on the speed of Choso's piercing blood during the anti-Sukuna squad battle and how Sukuna reacted to it. We know that piercing blood is faster than the speed of sound upon Choso's first use of it, not during Kamo's usage of the technique. This means that the speed of piercing blood differs between users. It can be faster and more damaging when compressed more, depending on the user, which means it can more than likely be improved through improving your ability with the technique as well. So it's fair to say that when piercing blood is used here, it is more than likely significantly faster than the speed of sound, so the technique itself is at its strongest here. Despite that fact, Sukuna, after being freshly awakened in his new form, reacts to this stronger variant of piercing blood, travels a significant distance, and pierces Choso. This feat has been calculated to have been around hypersonic plus to high hypersonic. So the speed Sukuna displays here is from between Mach 10 and Mach 25 levels of speed, and given how consistently Mahoraga is reacting to and engaging in the fight with Gojo and Sukuna, it's more than fair to put Big Raga's speed within this range. However, since it's quite difficult to find evidence to make JJK characters faster than this range, putting the speeds of the top tiers between Mach 10 and Mach 25 seems consistent. But for highball's sake, let's just say Mahoraga would have been exactly capable of this specific feat, and so he is also around Mach 25 levels of speed, just to highball him because why not? Now his durability. Mahoraga's durability is relatively simple on the surface. The version of Mahoraga we see during Shibuya is defeated by a combination of Malevolent Shrine and Furnace, or the Flame Arrow, or Fuga, or whatever you kids call it in Fortnite. Basically, he took two attacks that are more than likely small city level in attack potency. This can be gathered from the damage that was done to Shibuya from Jogo's Maximum Meteor, and Sukuna's Flame Arrow being stronger than this. The Flame Arrow even winning the clash against Jogo, so it kinda has to be stronger. This is further reinforced by the fan book that says that Jogo's Maximum Meteor is capable of burning an entire town and its surroundings to ashes, meaning it's an attack with around town to small city levels of AP, and of course the Flame Arrow is somewhere relative to, but significantly above that. Malevolent Shrine itself is also relative to that level of attack potency. It takes a combination of these two attacks to kill Mahoraga in Shibuya. However, the contention comes here. We know that the Mahoraga we see in Shinjuku is significantly stronger than the one we see in Shibuya. I mean, this Raga is losing to 15 Finger Sukuna, and this Raga is capable of tagging and keeping up with Shinjuku Gojo, who is significantly stronger than that. So it's fair to say his durability increased significantly as well. However, it's difficult to quantify by how much across these two versions. We know that the second version of Mahoraga died from Gojo's unlimited hollow purple, but that move is kind of difficult to determine the flat AP of, but it seems relative to the Flame Arrow. I'm not here to argue if one is stronger than the other, as that is still a commonly debated topic. However, I will say that they are obviously relative to each other, but it wouldn't be unfair to say it's another attack that was around small city to city level that killed Mahoraga, and this is consistent with the fact that, you know, a comparable attack, the Flame Arrow, killed him the first time. Then a similar level of attack, the Unlimited Hollow Purple, killed him the second time. So whilst this second Mahoraga is obviously more durable, it's not by a quantifiable amount, and the increased durability is not significant enough to warrant putting his overall durability and level of output to kill above the small city to city level of attack potency. So that's where we'll put his durability. Also, little extra thing here, if you think Hollow Purple is existence erasure, you're stupid. Now, what hacks does Mahoraga have? Well, he has adaptation. It's kind of the elephant in the room when you're discussing anything Mahoraga related. It allows Mahoraga to adapt to, quote, any phenomena. We see it adapt to abilities like Cleave and Dismantle, which in turn helps it to adapt to Malevolent Shrine. It adapts to Infinite Void as well as Red. We also see it being able to adapt to Blue, which is being used around Gojo's hands to enhance the damage from his punches by a significant margin. However, given this matchup, an interesting question gets raised. Can Mahoraga adapt to physical attacks themselves, not just curse techniques and extensions of them? We see in Mahoraga's fight with Sukuna only throws two non-curse technique attacks. He opens the fight by blocking the Sword of Extermination, and then follows by clocking Big Raga a few times in the jaw. Shortly after this, Sukuna lands a dismantle on Mahoraga's face, and then kicks him back down to earth. Given the context of what Sukuna says, most of his references to Mahoraga's adaptation here are very much seemingly referring to Cleave and Dismantle, less so his physical attacks. In the fight with Gojo, however, a lot more physical attacks are thrown Mahoraga's way. However, most of Gojo's standard punches are being buffed by Blue, which Mahoraga had adapted to over the course of the battle, meaning most of Gojo's punches would have been significantly weaker anyway, so it makes it kind of hard to determine, but given how its ability is described as being able to adapt to all phenomena, let's just take this statement as gospel to upscale Big Raga and assume that any attack that doesn't immediately kill him, he can eventually adapt to, including just straight up physical attacks like punches, right? Now, that's pretty much Mahoraga in a nutshell. In the word of Jujutsu Kaisen, he has more than enough reason to wear that wide, toothy, smug grin on his face, being nearly unkillable, only being stopped by the top two in the verse, Sukuna and Gojo, in that order. Whilst this sounds good on paper, how does this divine general scale to this biologically engineered abomination? The Nomu's AP. Everything we need to know about this Nomu's AP can be gathered straight from its heroic counterpart, All Might, as this Nomu is stated frequently to be created specifically to counter All Might. All Might's AP can be used as a measuring stick to judge this Nomu's AP. So All Might's AP in particular is calculated at being around mountain to island level, due to him being able to change the weather with a single punch casually, and this is seen very early on in the series, specifically during the first chapter, and it's pretty cut and dry. We see the sky before and after All Might's punch, as well as the rain falling shortly afterwards as a result of said punch. We even get statements pretty flat out saying that he changed the weather with a single punch. Whilst this may seem a bit over the top for the weakened All Might we are first introduced to, it stays consistent through the other attacks we see All Might use in his other fights even when weakened. For example, when he's wearing weights and his time being reduced even further after the Nomu fight at USJ, we see the training exercise with Deku and Bakugo, where he is capable of casually decimating the area just with the air pressure from one of his punches, not even the punch itself. And despite that fact, he was still required to go past his limits, past 100% of that level of power to defeat this Nomu. This Nomu's blows are literally being traded here, and on top of that, this Nomu is more than capable of not just tagging All Might, but also deal a good chunk of damage. All Might even struggling to break his grip here, needing Todoroki's aid to break free. Granted, Nomu was piercing the old wound on All Might's stomach, but it is still relevant to the discussion. We also have a few statements from surrounding characters during this battle that help reinforce the point that this Nomu is comparable to All Might's current strength at this point in the story. I mean, he was literally created to be his counter. So whilst he is obviously weaker than All Might, his AP is still comparable to these mountain level to island level punches. His speed. Now, for obvious reasons, this Nomu is relative and comparable to this version of All Might, as we see them clash in a full-on fist fight. This version of All Might, who is capable of perception blitzing this Deku so hard he thinks that Bakugo managed to dodge the Nomu and didn't even see All Might save him. This same Deku is capable of reacting to and blocking nitroglycerin explosions from Bakugo point blank. These same explosions have been calculated to have been upwards of Mach 20 for some ungodly reason, and Deku is capable of reacting to these on 2 occasions. Firstly, during the combat training very early on in the series, in which we see Deku react to Bakugo by blocking a whole ass explosion, just kind of raw dogging it with his arm. And the second occasion was, of course, during their second battle after All Might's retirement at full cowling 5%. Deku was shown to be able to completely evade these explosions, which, as I have said, have been calculated to be above Mach 20. And the explosions here are arguably faster than that, as Bakugo would be a good chunk stronger than he was during the first fight with Deku, which is absolutely insane. More interestingly, however, an even weaker All Might than the one that fought the Nomu has weighted gear equipped and fights both Bakugo and Deku at once. This Deku and Bakugo, of course, being stronger than the ones that fought each other during the first combat training. In this fight, All Might blitzes both of them, meaning a weighted and further weakened All Might is above Mach 20 by such a significant enough margin that he speed blitzes those who are also above Mach 20. And that is when weighted and further weakened from his battle with the Nomu. In his battle with the Nomu, he goes past his limit, at least in regards to AP and arguably speed, but he is definitely faster in the fight overall, since he has a longer timer and doesn't have any literal weights on. The Nomu is relative to this significantly faster than Mach 20 monster. I mean, we literally see this Nomu speed blitz this Deku from the end of Season 1 when protecting Shigaraki. So this dude is obviously way above Mach 20, and to be honest, given Mahoraga's possible max speed, I don't think I have to upscale this Nomu any higher, to be honest. It'd just be overkill. But overall, regarding the Nomu speed, it's kind of difficult to get an exact measurement of its speed, as it's kind of hard to get a more accurate read on weakened All Might speed. We have a good idea of his prime speed from comparisons with Deku, and Deku potentially reaching relativistic plus speeds during the final act, but it would be disingenuous to suggest this All Might, and in turn this Nomu, is around that level of speed. So I'll just say he's high hypersonic plus to massively hypersonic plus, if not a bit higher. This is due to how casually early Deku was hypersonic plus, and endgame Deku is potentially reaching, as I said, relativistic speeds if not higher, meaning this All Might and Nomu are a good chunk slower than endgame Deku, but still significantly faster than this early Deku and 5% full cowling Deku. So their speeds must be between the large ranges of significantly above Mach 25, which is high hypersonic plus, but significantly below the relativistic plus speeds that Deku reaches by the end of the series. Granted, for the sake of argument, you could maybe argue that All Might and Nomu are a little bit faster than massively hypersonic, but given the context of this versus battle and how fast Mahoraga is, we don't really need to make him any faster than this, because no matter how you cut it, Mahoraga gets outpaced by a significant margin, even if we lowball this Nomu. Now, his durability. This is pretty simple. The punches that can, alter the weather, destroy mountains, punches that can literally make it rain.
More than 300 of them.
Plus a few of those were even stronger than that, as All Might was pushing past his limit during this fight. And guess what?
The Nomu didn't die.
After this punch, which the anime portrays as if a bomb went off inside of the Nomu's body on some tailed beast bomb Obito Kamui stuff, this absolute creature survives. Granted, it was left comatose since All For One and Shigaraki just kind of left it behind, but it was still capable of not just surviving, but also regenerating whatever amount of its body was destroyed by this plus ultra punch from All Might. So his level of durability is around, casually 300 plus mountains. Why is the Nomu this durable? Well, that leads into his Hack's abilities. So, the reason for the Nomu's high durability is its Hack's quirks of shock absorption and super regeneration. As All Might says during their fight, his shock absorption has a limit. It's not straight up shock negation. And as a result, we eventually see All Might break through this limit. But as I also said 2 seconds ago, 300 plus punches. And on top of that, we see his regeneration is capable of regrowing both internal organs and entire limbs, muscle tissue, bone and blood vessels. He can remake them. Now, despite not having any Hack's abilities outside of ones that further increase the Nomu's survivability, he doesn't need anything more. He is a literal powerhouse, a super-powered living sandbag that is capable of dealing punches relative to a weakened All Might. And this weakened All Might couldn't even kill him. He lived, okay? Which is baffling.
Were you killed?
Sadly, yes. But I lived.
So who wins, right? To me, this entire fight is pretty cut and dry, in my opinion, right? If it isn't obvious, I believe that this Nomu absolutely destroys Mahoraga. From the start, this fight would have been dictated by who has the highest stats, as they both lack real named attacks, okay? If the Nomu has enough AP to kill Mahoraga with a single punch, it doesn't matter if he can adapt, right? He's already dead from the first punch. It's just that since the Nomu was modeled to literally compete with All Might, his raw stats are so far above Mahoraga, it's just cruel and ridiculous, right? Like, Mahoraga loses to single attacks that can destroy small cities and city levels, right? This Nomu loses to 300 plus punches that each possess the strength to destroy islands and mountains and literally change the weather. And on top of that, since All Might went past his limit to defeat the Nomu, even after taking all that damage, which is above mountain level times 300, the Nomu didn't die. So there isn't really an argument you can make for Mahoraga winning, since his level of power and durability is just so far lower than the Nomu's. The Nomu just kind of one-taps Mahoraga and blitzes him. It looks like a cool fight on paper, but it perfectly encapsulates why people tend to not do cross-verse battles with JJK characters outside of Sukuna and Gojo. And it's because their raw stats are a lot more grounded, but relatively grounded to other series like MHA that have characters reaching unfathomable speeds. JJK characters are strong, right, in their own verse, but they're not as strong when compared to other verses, especially My Hero, which has some ridiculous feats and numbers behind it, which, as I say, JJK sorely lacks. To put it mega simply, right, the endgame strongest characters of JJK in regards to their speeds, their AP and their durability are comparable, if not weaker, than the bottom tiers of MHA. So if we take a character like Nomu, who is in the upper echelons of MHA characters due to him being modelled after All Might, it makes it straight up impossible to say that any JJK characters, beyond characters like Gojo and Sukuna with their Hack's abilities, none of them have any way to beat some of the strongest characters in MHA, especially not Nomu. So Mahoraga gets wiped, plain and simple. Overall, when I was writing the script for this video, my initial opinion would be that it would be a back and forth stalemate that wouldn't really go anywhere. However, when you just look at their raw stats, they're not comparable, and they are just not in the same tier of power. So once I started finishing this script, it pretty much left me feeling this way about Mahoraga. But before the video ends, I want to give a huge thank you to Thailand, the absolute GOAT. He helped me out a lot with the scaling this video. He's an absolute G. So if you want more versus battle content, he has plenty of stuff. So feel free to check out his channel below. He's an absolute GOAT. But with that being said, everyone, thank you for watching. Toodles my doodles. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Don't get too angry in the comments. Peace.